May 1962. Adolf Eichmann is hanged, a Holocaust architect executed publicly. His ashes are scattered at sea so no grave can become a shrine. The story should end there. A monster brought to justice, a family left in disgrace, but his 4 sons were watching. Within months of that execution, 3 of his sons were building bombs and planning attacks on Jewish children. This is what happened to Adolf Eichmann's family and why his legacy refused to die with him. Before we trace how the Eichmann sons went from fugitives to terrorists, subscribe if you want to understand how Nazi ideology survived the men who built it. The decade they hid in plain sight. To understand how the sons radicalized, you need to see what they were raised in. After escaping Europe through Vatican rat lines in 1950, Adolf Eichmann didn't hide in some remote village or assume a new identity in obscurity. He got a job at Mercedes-Benz. He socialized openly with Buenos Aires' thriving German community. He attended meetings, shook hands, and lived as if the war crimes tribunals happening across Europe had nothing to do with him. By mid-1952, he felt secure enough to send for his wife Vera and their 4 sons. The family reunited in Argentina and settled into a comfortable middle-class existence. But here is what is remarkable. Despite Eichmann being perhaps the most wanted Nazi still alive, his children attended school under their real name. They did not use the name Clement, the alias their father had used. They used the name Eichmann. They walked into classrooms, introduced themselves to teachers, and made friends while carrying the name of a man Israeli intelligence was desperately hunting. For a decade this worked. The family lived in plain sight, protected by a web of Nazi sympathizers who had also fled to South America and by an Argentine government that saw no reason to look too closely at its German immigrants. The boys grew up watching their father treated with respect by the community around them. They learned that what he had done was not shameful. It was admirable. At least that is what everyone in their world seemed to believe. This comfortable existence shaped the sons in ways that would become clear only after their father's capture. They were not raised to feel guilt about the Holocaust. They were raised to feel pride in their family's role in it. The girlfriend who changed everything. But this protected life had a fatal weakness. And his name was Klaus. The eldest son had inherited his father's arrogance without any of his caution. In the late 1950s, Klaus began dating a teenage girl named Sylvia Hermann. She was pretty, she was German-speaking, and Klaus was eager to impress her. What Klaus did not know was that Sylvia's father, Lothar Hermann, was a Holocaust survivor. He had fled Germany before the war, but not before the Nazis had blinded him during a brutal beating. Now he lived quietly in Buenos Aires, raising his daughter in the same German émigré community that sheltered the Eichmanns. One evening, Klaus came to dinner at the Hermann home. He wanted to make an impression on Sylvia's family, so he talked about his own father, about how Ricardo Clement was not really Ricardo Clement at all, but rather a high-ranking official from the Nazi government. Klaus bragged about what his father had accomplished, about his important position during the war. Lothar Hermann sat at that table, blind but listening to every word. He could not see the young man boasting about genocide, but he heard everything, and he recognized the significance immediately. After Klaus left that night, Lothar began making inquiries. He contacted Israeli intelligence and shared what he had learned. The son's arrogance at a dinner table would cost his father everything. The bouquet that sealed his fate. Mossad took the tip seriously but moved carefully. For months, agents watched the man who called himself Ricardo Clement. They observed his routines, his habits, his family life. But they needed absolute confirmation before they could act. Grabbing the wrong man would be a disaster, diplomatically, politically, and morally. The confirmation came on March 21, 1960. That evening, agents observed Clement arrive home carrying something unusual, a bouquet of flowers. He handed them to his wife at the door. The gesture seemed small, almost mundane. But the date mattered. It was their 25th wedding anniversary. Adolf Eichmann and Vera Liebel had married on March 21, 1935. Ricardo Clement had just revealed himself through a moment of tenderness. 7 weeks later, on May 11, 1960, Mossad agents grabbed Eichmann on a darkened street as he walked home from a bus stop. They bundled him into a car and spirited him to a safe house, where he spent 10 days before being smuggled onto a plane to Israel, disguised as an LL crew member recovering from an accident. But the confirmation did not end there. When Vera filed a complaint with Argentine courts about her husband's kidnapping, she made an extraordinary admission in writing. The legal document she submitted stated plainly that Ricardo Clement was Adolf Eichmann. In trying to get her husband back, she had officially confirmed his identity to the world. Judgment in Jerusalem. For the first time in history, a Holocaust perpetrator would face judgment not from Allied victors, but from the people he had tried to exterminate. The Jerusalem trial opened in April 1961 and became something unprecedented, the first major Holocaust testimony broadcast globally. Survivors who had never spoken publicly about their experiences took the witness stand and told their stories to millions of viewers. The trial lasted 4 months. The evidence was overwhelming. Eichmann had managed the logistics of genocide with bureaucratic precision, coordinating train schedules and camp capacities as if he were running a shipping company rather than organizing mass murder. His defense, that he was merely following orders, merely a cog in a machine, convinced no one. On December 15, 1961, the court convicted Adolf Eichmann on 15 counts, including crimes against the Jewish people and crimes against humanity. His family submitted a joint clemency appeal. They asked Israel to spare his life. The appeal was rejected, but Israel granted one extraordinary concession. They allowed Vera a secret prison visit. Foreign Minister Golda Meir personally imposed the conditions. We had 24 hours maximum and had to leave Israel immediately after. Vera went to Ramla prison and spent time alone with her husband inside his cell. What happened between them in those final hours is still unknown. She never spoke about it publicly, and there's no record of their conversation. The execution was meant to end everything. On May 31, 1962, at 1 minute past midnight, Adolf Eichmann was hanged at Ramla prison. He was the only person ever executed by the State of Israel. His body was cremated within hours. His ashes were scattered in the Mediterranean Sea, beyond Israeli territorial waters. The Israelis had considered everything to prevent his followers from venerating him. They didn't want any place for neo-Nazis to gather and pay tribute. They had closed off every possibility of him becoming a martyr, and they eliminated any chance of a physical legacy. But they hadn't anticipated the sons. What happened next completely defies expectations from a family involved in the most publicized Nazi trial in history. You might think they would have retreated in shame, changed their names, and tried to disappear. You would be wrong. The terror cell in Buenos Aires. Within months of the execution, 3 of the 4 Eichmann sons doubled down on their father's ideology. They did so in ways that even shocked Argentine authorities. Clausenhorst formed a neo-Nazi terror cell in Buenos Aires. He recruited like-minded young men and began stockpiling weapons. Police surveillance of the Eichmann home revealed swastika flags flying from their windows. Horst wore a Nazi armband inside the house, as if the war had never ended. The brothers manufactured Molotov cocktails and collected firearms. They distributed propaganda throughout the German community. They weren't just honoring their father's memory. They were continuing his work. Their targets included Jewish institutions across Buenos Aires. Police reports from 1962 described their plans to bomb a school bus carrying Jewish children. The sons of the man who organized the transport of millions to death camps were now planning to murder children on their way to school. When Argentine police finally raided their headquarters, they found an arsenal of weapons and stacks of Nazi materials. The evidence was undeniable. Horst was convicted and served approximately 2 years in prison. This was a remarkably light sentence considering the severity of the plot. Klaus was released for what the court called a lack of substantial evidence, despite the weapons found in his home. Neither brother ever renounced their father. Neither expressed regret for their involvement with the terror cell. They simply continued living in Argentina, older but no wiser, their beliefs completely unchanged. But one son chose a completely different path. Ricardo was only 5 years old when Mossad agents grabbed his father on that Buenos Aires street. He had no real memories of Adolf Eichmann as a free man. He only remembered the trial, the execution, and the aftermath. After the execution, Vera took Ricardo back to Germany. She raised him there but refused to discuss her husband's crimes. The subject was simply off-limits. Ricardo grew up knowing who his father was but received no guidance on how to process that knowledge. He chose education. Ricardo studied prehistory and archaeology at the University of Heidelberg. He earned his doctorate and built a career entirely separate from his family's history. Eventually, he became director of the Orient Department at the German Archaeological Institute in Berlin. This was a prestigious position in one of Europe's leading research institutions. In 1995, Ricardo gave an interview to Israeli newspapers that stunned his family. He stated publicly that he was happy the trial and sentence had taken place. He also said that, as an adult, he had no connection with his father. Of the 4 sons, he was the only one to publicly condemn Adolf Eichmann. The family split, with 3 brothers who became more Nazi than their father ever was, and one who walked away entirely. That split mirrors how Germany itself divided over confronting its past. Some doubled down on denial. Others chose to face the truth. Ricardo proved that breaking free was possible, even from the darkest of inheritances. For brothers, for fates. So where are they now? Klaus died in Germany in 2015 from Alzheimer's disease. In all his years, he never spoke a single word against his father. He carried his beliefs to the grave, unrepentant and unchanged. Horst died the same year in Buenos Aires from cancer. His mistress, Carmen Breton Lindemann, described him in interviews as a strong Nazi. She said he believed his father was innocent until the very end. Even in his final years, swastika flags hung in his home. He died as he had lived, committed to an ideology that had killed millions. Dieter, the quiet middle brother, chose a different strategy than either extremism or condemnation. He chose silence. As of 2018, he was reportedly still alive, living in a Buenos Aires apartment just blocks from where Mossad seized his father nearly 60 years earlier. He has never spoken publicly, never granted an interview, and never confirmed or denied his beliefs about his father's crimes. His silence speaks volumes, but exactly what it says remains open to interpretation. Ricardo retired from the German Archaeological Institute in 2020. He lives in Germany, far from his brothers, having built a life and career that had nothing to do with his father's legacy. He proved that the Eichmann name did not have to be a curse if you were willing to reject everything it stood for. The family that Israel tried to deny a shrine by scattering Eichmann's ashes instead became 4 living monuments. 3 were dedicated to the ideology that would not die, and 1 was dedicated to the possibility of breaking free. The legacy that wouldn't scatter. Vera Eichmann died in 1997 at the age of 88. She spent her final decades reading the Bible and refusing to discuss her husband. In all those years, she never made a single public statement about his crimes. She never acknowledged the suffering he caused, and never expressed remorse for her role in raising sons who would continue his ideology. What the Eichmann family reveals is deeply uncomfortable. Proximity to genocide does not automatically produce moral reckoning. The sons who lived longest with their father, who absorbed his worldview during their formative years, became the most radical. They did not reject what he stood for. They amplified it. The son who barely knew him, who was too young to remember him as anything but a defendant in a glass booth, was the only one who could condemn him. Adolf Eichmann's ashes are somewhere in the Mediterranean, scattered so thoroughly that no trace remains. The Israelis succeeded in denying him a physical grave. But his family proves something that should trouble all of us. Ideas are harder to scatter than remains. Beliefs do not dissolve in seawater. Hatred passes from generation to generation through dinner table conversations, through bragging to girlfriends, through swastika flags hung in living rooms. The Eichmann sons were given every opportunity to choose differently. They could have rejected their father's legacy, as Ricardo eventually did. Instead, 3 of them chose to carry it forward, to build bombs, plan attacks, and keep the faith. The man who organized the trains to Auschwitz raised sons who wanted to bomb school buses. That is the uncomfortable truth about Nazi legacies. Execution does not end them. Scattered ashes do not prevent them. The only thing that stops ideology from spreading is the individual choice to reject it. Was the only one who could condemn him. Adolf Eichmann's ashes are somewhere in the Mediterranean, scattered so thoroughly that no trace remains. The Israelis succeeded in denying him a physical grave. But his family proves something that should trouble all of us. Ideas are harder to scatter than remains. Beliefs do not dissolve in seawater. Hatred passes from generation to generation through dinner table conversations, through bragging to girlfriends, through swastika flags hung in living rooms. The Eichmann sons were given every opportunity to choose differently. They could have rejected their father's legacy, as Ricardo eventually did. Instead, 3 of them chose to carry it forward, to build bombs and plan attacks and keep the faith. The man who organized the trains to Auschwitz raised sons who wanted to bomb school buses. That is the uncomfortable truth about Nazi legacies. Execution does not end them. Scattered ashes do not prevent them. The only thing that stops ideology from spreading is the individual choice to reject it. And that choice is much rarer than we like to think.